All right, welcome back to the program. Professor KenIfe, Development Economist, is with me right here at the table. Welcome to you, Professor Ife. And
thank you.
How are
you
you
for
doing?
having me.
Let's get started because we have quite a lot to talk about. MTEF, that's the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, as well as the Fiscal Strategy Paper. We see those words, the acronyms. I just want you in simple terms to explain to our viewers what they mean and what's the, what's the importance?
Background.
Yes, the background.
Yes. Well, the meaning of the Fiscal Strategy Paper is a paper that is prepared, that looks at the policy of government and make sure that what is going to be prepared as MTEF, which is, I will explain, links to policy and that the policy responds to the Constitution, constitutional provisions, relevant constitutional provisions. The MTEF itself is the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, which is a very transparent tool used to develop our budget and working in line with what the FSP has actually put forward. I will explain all that in the course of our discussion. But by way of background to all of this, if you recall, in 2005, Nigeria's economy was at a melting point because we were owing about over $30 billion to Paris clubs and all that. In fact, they stopped counting then. And then one of the consequences of all that debt forgiveness and all of that was the coming together to develop a Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. And that Act 2007 governs budget process, debt sustainability issues. It addresses a lot of, in fact, the description of that act is that it's a law that is to promote transparency, accountability, and fiscal prudence in management of our public finances. So that's the description. And all of these aspirations of that law were captured in the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy Paper. That's why it's so important. It's the heart of government public finance. But let me take you to the actual provision in that act. Section 11, subsection 1A and B, states that federal government, after consultation with states, not later than 6 months of the commencement of this act, should cause to be prepared and laid before National Assembly the medium-term expenditure framework over the next 3 years. And the second one says that this practice, subsequent ones have to be done 4 months before the commencement of a new fiscal year. So that is the law. But this MTEF didn't come into action until 2009, 2 years after the act came into being. Okay.
I like that you've done that explanation, and you've also linked it to FRA, that's Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007.
Which is currently being amended.
Yes, which is currently, being amended. Now, let's expand further. But before I go to MTEF and FSP of 2022 to 2024, I don't know if you would like to speak about the budget performance, so to speak, of 2020. Because, of course, 2020, the whole world was on a lockdown. We still have COVID, quite a lot. We saw oil price, drifting downwards, close to in the negative territory, as it were. So I would like us to take it from budget performance of 2020, then we dovetail into 2021. Then, what the macroeconomic framework would look like for 2020 to 2024.
I'm glad you started from there because there are 5 major components of this MTEF and FSP story. One is the macroeconomic framework, which is where you look at what is the context, what are the key macroeconomic variables, and how are we tracking them in a time series. If you take inflation, what's the trend on inflation? You take a GDP growth rate, you take poverty, unemployment, and then even government revenue performance, and then government expenditure performance, the debt issues, what's the performance of. So all of these are taken over a long time frame to set the context of where we are and how government revenue has shifted. In fact, even looking at the principal component like oil and non-oil to see how they have performed over the years. So that's what the first one does. Then the second one, which is the Fiscal Strategy Paper, now looks at government policy, relevant government policies, and then says what the current laws are. For example, the tax law, like Finance Act always updates the tax laws, what the current rates are for particular charges. So he says all of them out. And then he tries to link what we are trying to do to the relevant sections of the Constitution, just to give you a strategy that is based on a well-articulated government policy framework and government strategic needs and strategic priorities. So it sets all of them down. Then also, it now comes and looks at some fundamentals that the budget is based on. It takes oil price. And then not only that it looks at the last 3 years of the oil price, it projects over the next 3 years, because the whole thing about MTEF, remember, is a medium-term expenditure framework. It looks at a medium-term view. It takes a medium-term view of our economy. No government activity begins and ends in 1 year. So they take 3 years, a 3-year rolling plan. And so when you're going to project over the next 3 years, you are better advised to look at what happened over the last 3 years. So you can use that to extrapolate. So the FSP, the Fiscal Strategy Paper, uses that methodology, looking at what has happened over the 3 years on each of these parameters, and then projects what it could be over the next 3 years. So if it takes oil price, it looks at the oil price's performance and then projects over. But the projection on oil price, we are not magicians. It uses some standard international benchmarks. For example, United States Energy Information Agency is one of the people that projects on this. So they take an average and then use it to project what the OPEC situation might be over the next 3 years. Then it looks at inflation and then projects on what inflation could be over the next 3 years, obviously based on what we've seen. And then it takes exchange rates and looks at exchange rates and also projects on those, sets all these benchmark. Of course, you have our foreign reserves. You will have a picture of that, as well as other key parameters. So these are now going to be the basis for which the budget is going to be drawn, based on what have been projected in the fiscal strategy paper. Then they now come to the main budget itself. Now, the first one is to look at the expenditure framework. And then, revenue framework, because you've got to see what you're going to get. So they also look at revenue performance, as you asked, revenue performance over the last 3 years, and then they'll project over the next 3 years of the MTEF plan based on what FSP has as the parameters they have given. Then they also look at revenue, the expenditure. How have we fared on expenditure? And that expenditure will also be projected over the next 3 years. Now we come to the crunch, the number 4 and number 5. Number 4 looks at consolidated debt statement. Now that's where you're going to look at debt performance. Look at, how have we, look at the total, the state ones, the federal ones, the domestic debt, foreign debt, and look at how they're performing and how they're projected to perform over this period. Then the last one is the contingent liability statement, and that is really where you are going to focus on, what are the parameters? How are we doing with the parameters? And that's where the difficult questions are asked, and then you identify some of the key debts of some MDAs, and, to see, the idea is to prevent a crystallization of our debt. That's the whole idea. So you're going to seriously monitor how we are going to ensure that none of these contingent liabilities of government is going to be allowed to crystallize. And that creates a big problem if we fail to pay.
Prof, I'm feeling as if I'm in a class.
It's just for the benefit of the viewer.
Yes, I know.
This is not a subject that is discussed across many media. So when she asked me to come and talk about MTEF, and I say, oh, that's nice. It will be an opportunity for the public to actually understand what this MTEF is, what the strategy paper means, how it relates to the law, and then how it relates to the Constitution, how it plays out the government policy, strategic framework, priorities, all of that. It's
so fantastic. I love it. That's why I said earlier that's like we're in a class, and I wanted it like that. Why? So that at least I asked you at the beginning, I want it explained in simple terms, because I know that majority of Nigerians may just see this and some will be confused, some may be uninterested, some will be like, what is this again? So that's why we're really doing this, to know these are the projections. These are what this is what government is saying. This is what will happen likely, prediction from now to the next 3 years. As a savvy person too, you'll be able to key in, as
Correct.
it were. Yes, as a businessman, you'll be able to key in, because these are the things that also matter. So, Prof, let's now dig deep and take a look at those assumptions. Like you've enumerated revenue. We're also looking at some other benchmarks, oil price, GDP, growth rates, inflation. Then we'll take a look at also debt servicing, because in fact, I've not finished reading it because it's 68-page stuff, but I will take, from here and there, but just speak on what I've talked to you about. And then we'll go to a bit to budget deficit, where I saw, for even this year, the budget deficit projected 5.62 trillion naira, up from 2020 of 5.60 trillion. But we'll go into all of that, but just start with what I asked.
Well, just before I get into that, I think there are 3 major tools that are used to guide MDAs and government department, ministry departments and agencies in preparation of their budgets. Even some states as well, because states are going to be consulted, as you know, and we have FRA law being domesticated in some states. We want them in all the states. So these 3 tools are: one, the Fiscal Responsibility Index. Now, the MDAs try to run a test on themselves to answer a set of questions on how is your budgeting process responding to some of the things I have mentioned before. How realistic are they? Because don't forget that this MTEF takes envelopes from government and then try to use a bottom-up approach to analyzing the costs and try to match what is available to them and what the budget that they have prepared. So that's what it tries to do. The second one is Fiscal Sustainability Index, which also looks at the MDAs. The other one looks at the government states, but that looks at how you are performing across a few indicators. And then the last one is the Fiscal Vulnerability Index, which also is more in line with the flashpoints of fiscal stress. So we are looking at all of those. So in relation to your question, the budget performance, actually, I think last year we actually exceeded the budget, even though at the beginning, at the onset of COVID, we were told that it's going to impact the budget by 60%. But then all the efforts came from different directions, from fiscal policy. That was quantitative fiscal policy response and monetary policy response. About 3.5 trillion was on the table from the CBN side of things, and 2.3 trillion fiscal economic sustainability plan. So all of those, and then there were loans, there were money from IMF, World Bank, everywhere. So in the end of the day, we actually exceeded the budget that we had for last year. But that also means that we exceeded the debt. We incurred far more debt. But that's the story. So you can see that because of the handshake between Monetary and Fiscal Policy Authority, money was poured in to ensure that we can fight the recession. And the recession was stagflation, so it wasn't an easy one. But you could see that within a quarter, we jumped out of recession.
Okay, Prof, sorry to cut you short. Now that you've just said stagflation, I wanted to ask, I'm asking, do you think we've moved out of that stagflation environment? Are we still there?
I don't think so. The numbers are telling us that we are out. Even the last GDP result says plus 5%. But the thing is that the underlying thing is that the inflation, which is what makes it stagflation, is still trending, and is being moderated, but we want to see how steep it could, that moderation. So we're still in the environment, but we are fighting very hard. We really are fighting very hard by injecting money. Remember what we have happened, why we got out very quickly was that, whilst on one hand, there was investment going out, public investment on public works, trying to create employment, and then all sorts of government measures trying to create jobs. And then you have CBN on agriculture pouring trillions. So while that was going on, and of course the manufacturing sector had a 1 trillion sitting there for them, all were increasing output. But we needed to make sure that we are putting money on the consumption side of the balance sheet to enable people who have been displaced from work, the low economic activity, to be able to buy what is being produced. So in that way, we were able to balance it and got out very, very quickly. But, you know, the temptation, when you are pouring so money into the system, it has impact on inflation. But there were far more pressurizing factors around food basket index that was consistently and persistently high for so many reasons, including security and cross-border trade.
Okay, so continue. Let's continue on the trajectory, the assumptions that is contained.
Okay, let's look at the assumptions. The assumption around the oil obviously went through the roof because as soon as COVID came, the whole impact was that the production volume went down to about 1.3, 1.4, and then the price was something else. The price dropped about 25%, or $25 per barrel. And in the United States, shale oil price, some of them actually went to minus 25 because they just came and couldn't find where to, they had to pay you to buy the
oil.
But gradually now, we are beginning to recover. We are now performing above our benchmark price, and but we've still lost substantial revenue. Over 60% of the oil revenue couldn't be recovered over that period. Looking forward to the future, it looks like the price might stay. It's over 65 to 70, and then it's likely to hang around between that range for the next 3 years, very likely.
Really, Prof?
Because output is coming back very strong.
Okay, because of people are coming
People
back
have found
to work.
a way around COVID, you know, to return back to flying around, and then the shippers are doing their shipment, and manufacturers are back, you know, but stricter rules on compliance, COVID compliance. So, you know, we are sort of getting, and then vaccine is giving us more confidence that we should get back to business.
But in Nigeria?
That's another story. We're not doing very badly, actually, because the number of deaths in Nigeria is not even up to what
But how about the number of people getting vaccinated?
In America
How about the number of people getting vaccinated? Some people are
that's a different story, though, because we were promised that every country will get free 20% vaccine for their population. So we were hoping that 40 million Nigerians were going to benefit from free vaccine. And we're not seeing that yet, because I think it's only about 4 million or something instead of 40. So we see a long way from getting those. And then we also have to make provision, financial provision to buy, because we are going to buy the extra 40% to bring us to 60% of the population, which is where you have the herd immunity. You know,
but some Nigerians don't even want to take the vaccine.
Well, we haven't even got enough of those who
let's
want
get
to
enough
take it.
first.
It's in America that many people don't want to take it. The statistics tells them that 99% of the people who are dying are the people who didn't take the vaccine. The vaccine. So,
okay, Prof. As we round up, you know, I wish we had more time, but because of what happened earlier, our dear president is in a hurry, you know. But let's take a look specifically at how government can improve revenue, as well as how our debt, sustainability of debt, because it's like the majority of what we make, we're using it to service debts. So what is your outlook from 2022 to 2024, really? I see what government has put here, I would really study it more, and we may still have to do another show on it.
Yeah,
but
why not?
The issue there is how should government, or how does government improve revenue, while the issue of debt is on one hand. So we are making, the other hand is taking.
I think the government is still borrowing.
Yes, it is.
Without a doubt. People are concerned about the level of borrowing, especially on the sustainability side of it, especially when you look at the payment, the ability to repay. But I have to say, in relation to your question, that government is doing quite a lot on increasing revenue. At the moment, we're the lowest in Africa because we're about 6 to 8%. Our government revenue is 6 to 8% of our GDP.
Okay.
But most countries are about 15%, 18%. And in fact, even in West Africa region, most of them are over 20% of their GDP revenue. And the macroeconomic convergence criteria for ECOWAS to get into a single currency wants all of them to be above 20% of the GDP, their revenue. So I know that the government is trying to triple that revenue, which means from, to anywhere between 15 to 18%. So that would be good news. But they are doing things like getting to the to the root of it, like infrastructure is what takes a lot of the lending. So they're floating infrastructure company, PLC, which is going out, already 1 trillion is made available for them, and they are going to go out to the market to raise 15 trillion. And it's naira, not dollars, to use that to focus on the infrastructure in the country. And that means the government can now offload all these their, core infrastructure, about 26 of them, and then they can run with those. And so that is one way.
Okay.
And take over. Then the second way is that they're looking at other sources of revenue, because don't forget that we were able to borrow from the pension fund to help us bring down the treasury rate, the yield on treasury bills. So we push that down from 14% to less than 5% now. And then we're also looking to look other ways of like money, sources of other funds from the capital market, national savings bond kind of thing that could also increase what could be available to be borrowed against.
Okay.
Then we are looking at assets owned by government, because the narrative around Nigeria's debt is that, oh, they can't service their debt, they haven't got that, so it's illiquid. But we're not looking at our assets.
Okay, I think
so.
Prof,
When we start looking at our assets now and start bringing them into the equation, so much of the lending will be asset-based lending. It means taking companies to market to take, like Saudi Arabia needed $25 billion. They didn't go to World Bank or IMF. They said, oh, right, okay, Saudi Aramco is owned by me. Tell me the value of it.
Yes, just
and
a
once
bit
they
of
knew
it.
the value was over 1.5 trillion, they said, okay, I want 5%. Just put it in the market, 5%. They got the money they wanted.
Okay, Prof, I think we'll leave it at that. We'll continue on another day. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For sticking by. Let's continue the show. The monetary policy plays a stabilizing role in influencing economic growth through a number of channels. It also influences expectations about the future direction of economic activity and inflation, thus affecting the prices of goods, asset prices, exchange rates, as well as consumption and investment. On this edition of CBN Weekly, Emmanuel Audu takes a look at the decisions made so far this year, looking at the Monetary Policy Committee meetings this year, as the September edition is just a few days away. So at this time, I'll see you all again tomorrow, God willing. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you could be, but the change you want to see.